Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Mr. Iggy Domagalski. How you doing, Iggy?
Doing great, Tyler. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Yeah, again. I'm going to warmly welcome you as the latest entrant into the Five Timers Club. So this is our 5th episode. I was doing some creeping on my own on our content this morning. 2019, way back in the early days of They Just Get It. We had a chat. I think you and I had just met each other around that period, that period of time. So it's been great to continue to have those conversations over the years, watch the evolution of your journey as a leader from Tundra to Wajax. You're CEO at Wajax now. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I'll be honest, it's just an excuse to get you back on and have a good old-fashioned conversation. So welcome back.
Well, thank you very much. I always love spending time with you and catching up with you. So, sometimes we do it on camera and sometimes we don't.
Absolutely. Sometimes we record it for posterity. Absolutely. For the fans, they're just sitting there waiting for us to record another episode.
I'm thrilled to do that.
Let's not get carried away too early in the show. CEO at Wajax. I always love to play feign ignorance. What's a Wajax?
Wajax is one of Canada's longest standing and most diversified industrial products companies and service companies. So we've been around a long time. We've been around since 1858, which actually makes us 9 years older than the founding of our nation, which is pretty cool. We have about 3,000 teammates coast to coast across 120 branches, and we essentially sell and service equipment. So everything from really large Hitachi excavators or Hyster forklifts, engines, transmissions, power generation gear, all the way into the smaller industrial components that would keep any kind of facility or factory going, such as bearings, motors, valves. And so that's essentially our business. Basically, we keep industrial Canada moving. It's something that we're really proud of, and I've always really liked working in companies that have real tangible gear, and that's certainly what we have. So it's a neat company with a great history, and I think a pretty exciting future.
From the smallest bearing to the machine it actually works on, you guys kind of are infiltrated through or ingrained through that whole chain.
Absolutely.
Is there any sectors you don't work in?
Are there any areas that we don't work in?
Yeah, specifically from like around industrial. Like I could go into mining and forestry, and I know you're involved in all those. Is there any? Yeah. It's probably the list is shorter of maybe where you don't play. That's why I asked it that way.
Yeah, I would say the list is shorter of where we don't play. Where we really do play is supporting a lot of Canada's primary industries.
Okay.
So if you think about all the resource industries, we service oil sands, oil and gas, all types of mining, forestry, and pulp and paper, and really any industrial, commercial kind of operations. We would play a lot less in tech kind of areas where right. we supply industrial gear. But that certainly touches food and beverage, automotive, aerospace, and a whole bunch of other industries. So there's niche industries that we don't play in, but we've got over 30,000 customers. So we deal with a lot of businesses in this country.
I'm assuming technology is also playing, whether it's IoT, whether it's just the reality of there's not much that's analog these days, even though there's probably still a machine running out on a job site somewhere that just has a motor tied to it that maybe isn't hooked into the grid of things. But I'm assuming that list is getting shorter and shorter every year.
Yeah, there's a lot of the gear that we supply is definitely tied in through telemetry to kind of a master cloud database where the information is transmitted up to the cloud, and then our customers can see what's happening in their machine in real time, whether it's just knowing the mileage on their machine, or whether it's knowing that some sensor is acting up and maybe they need to do some work on the machine. So that's kind of table stakes these days. And then we're also starting to use technology more within our business just to drive better decisions and just run our business more efficiently. Yeah, I think admittedly we have not been a technology leader. We tend to be a follower, but there's a lot of great technologies out there to follow that really can add a lot of value to business.
And seeing, I think, and I've chatted with a few people in the space, like the basics of maintenance and forecasting downtime and making sure that a machine is repaired and managed in the right time, to that next level, which is, okay, I want insights that can optimize efficiency, how we're using the machine, the type of work it's doing. I appreciate the step one was, okay, preventative from a maintenance perspective, and then moving on to what insights can we have that actually can drive more performance and more efficiency across our business. Are you seeing that? Is it pretty evenly distributed, whether it's, and again, I'm not into get to be specific with forestry versus mining versus oil sands. Is everybody kind of coming on board with all those different technologies at their own pace, but kind of similar stepping stones?
Yeah, I think so. I would say the larger companies tend to be a little bit more on top of it. Just because they have a larger number of machines to spread that technology cost across, so it just makes a little bit more sense for them. And the bigger, more sophisticated players just tend to be more sophisticated, so they really delve into the data a little bit more. Whereas some of your smaller operators that only have a few machines, it's just they can see every machine in a day, so they don't need a robust data feed telling them what's going on. The
snapshot is the site soup, or the person who's been there, that intellectual capital that's been there for 10 years that has a pretty good idea what's going on the job site. Once that goes beyond that ability, then obviously technology is where you can hopefully fill that gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thinking about the sectors that you work in, thinking about the equipment you buy, thinking about all the different parts, we can't have a conversation in February of 2025 without talking about what's going on right now, from a cross-border tariffs, globalization becoming more individualization, and the walls going up physically or otherwise. Snapshot or thoughts on, from a leadership perspective, how are you looking at the current climate, maybe now, and more importantly, in the next 6 to 18 months?
Yeah, I guess I'll talk a little bit about just how we're thinking about it, our little world of our company.
Little big world.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about the tariffs, the tariffs that are currently announced on anything going into the U.S. are paid for by the U.S. importer. And we don't actually send a lot of stuff directly to the U.S. A very small portion of our business goes direct to the U.S. from us to a U.S. customer, or even from us to a Canadian customer who's based in the U.S. That's a minuscule portion of our business. Impact, very, very minimal. Where we see potential impact is what is happening to our customers. And because we serve a lot of the primary industries, a lot of them export to the U.S. So if you think about the recent tariffs that came in on steel and aluminum, we service and sell to a lot of the steel and aluminum producers in Canada, and a huge portion of their volume goes to the U.S. And all of a sudden, they've just got a 25% cost adder onto whatever they're selling to the United States. So, initially, it's hard to say what's going to happen with the volumes, because so many of these contracts are contracts. And, some will have clauses where it allows a buyer to get out, some won't. And so I'm really unsure what will happen with those volumes. But if these tariffs last for any period of time, then those customers ultimately will slow down their operations if they're not able to find other markets to sell to. So hopefully Canadian steel and aluminum producers will figure out, okay, well, if I can't sell to America, I'll sell to Asia or Europe. And, they'll be able to make up those volumes, but that takes a while. And so the logical conclusion is they will slow down their operation. Maybe instead of running 2 shifts, they'll run 1, or they'll shut down some facilities. And those facilities buy gear from us and services from us to keep running. So they would slow down. So that's how we would think about the slowdown in business happening. But what's interesting, we look back to the 2019 tariff period.
There is a bit of a playbook, however slight, that this isn't the first time, right?
This isn't the first time. It was slightly different. It was 25 on steel and 10% on aluminum. Now it's 25 on both. But during that period, which lasted about a year, we actually didn't see much of a slowdown. The customers kept making the product and kept shipping it. And so for us, the impact was pretty minimal. How it will play out this time, who knows? But in the kind of the steel aluminum tariff, the impact on us won't be that huge. But I think on others, it could be quite meaningful.
Well, I like your comment about, we hear the thing, how long does it take? 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to play out? You've got commodities contracts in place. You have a need, and the user on the other end also has orders that they've now pre-sold. It does take a while for that to work its way through the system. What the news cycle is, and then reality are, for these bigger situations, are a lot. They're not connected in that way.
Yeah, and then there's I think where the big worry is for our country, and that everyone seems to be worried about, is just these blanket tariffs where, there's going to be a tariff on absolutely everything going into the United States. And that's a lot of stuff, right? Like whether it's oil, whether it's manufactured goods, whether it's wood, there's so many things that go into the United States that's going to cause a problem. It's really going to upend some industries. I feel for the folks that are in automotive. Holy moly!
Yeah.
I mean, I've read that some of those parts cross the border 5 times. That's a 25% tariff each time. Like you've just added 125% cost onto a part. Like you can't do that. That doesn't make any sense. And then what impact does that have on these car companies and how they'll have to totally rejig their supply chains? And that's not just Canadian companies. That's American companies too. And then there's the retaliatory tariffs, which our government did put in, for a day until it all got postponed. And again, for us, those were. I went through the list. I mean, there's, if it's not being able to or paying more for Kentucky bourbon doesn't affect our company, but there were some things like tires and some consumables, wood products, paper products, safety gear, that adds some cost to our business, which we then have to pass on. And then our customers either accept it or they try to find somewhere else to get it that is not subject to those tariffs. And then we also would be examining our supply chain.
Yeah, when you look at your supply chain, how diversified is that between excavators that might come from Asia versus stuff that comes up from the U.S.? It obviously doesn't sound like from what you're saying that you guys are exclusively tied to kind of U.S. supply chain, that you do have a global network.
We do have a global network, but a lot of it does come through the U.S.
Okay.
So
even if it kind of bounces this way through the U.S. from somewhere else.
Exactly right. So it might be made in Europe, but then it's stocked in the United States, and then it comes into Canada. And then so as these tariffs kind of come into play, will that stuff be tariffed when it comes into Canada? Because it's coming from America, but it's not American. So I think there's just not full clarity around the rules of origin on a lot of these products. But we've already started to see some increases in pricing, for example, for products that are from China that get stocked in America that come to Canada, and we're seeing a 10% price increase on those because the United States is already about a 10% tariff on Chinese goods. So I think we've been doing some analysis to try to figure out what is going to happen, but I think the one thing I can say confidently is that we really don't know yet, and we don't know exactly how these tariffs will play out. We don't know exactly what Canada will do and on which goods will be tariffed coming into the country. And even if we did know that with certainty, I think we still don't know exactly what the outcome is in the short term and the long term, because there's not that many use cases that you can look back on. We have that short one from 2018, 2019. And what happened then, at least in our business, didn't even make sense. I mean, our volumes should have gone way down and they didn't. And so I think there's, it's a big economic experiment that's happening right now. Like the outcome
it feels that way. It does feel
President Trump believes certain things, and he believes that things will unfold in a certain way. And there's really, really smart economists on both sides of that argument saying, oh yeah, that will for sure happen. And then there's other ones saying that's the opposite of what's going to happen. It's going to, there's not going to be this benefit that you think. So we're experiencing a really, really big, massive, worldwide economics experiment, and I think we're all, a little apprehensive and curious to see how it's all
apprehensive. Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic and apprehensively curious.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I think we all remember back to the week before the '08, like when things became real. There was a lot of really smart people that didn't know that was going to happen either, right? Sometimes I'd get some solace, and maybe it's okay. I don't know what's going to happen either.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a good book out there. It's called Same as Ever, and it's by the guy that wrote The Psychology of Money, and he just talks about
Morgan Housel. Yeah, he's great. Yeah. I like his writing style.
Yeah, and so it reads really well. It's kind of stories, and just he's a good writer. Yeah. But he just talks about how things don't really change in the world that much, right? And the big things that really, really matter, like that really have mattered in our lifetime, and you can pick them all, right? Financial crisis, COVID, like there's a few kind of big ones that have happened. Nobody saw those coming. Nobody. And so not only are we awful at predicting the future in any kind of meaningful way,
Yeah.
the big things that actually matter, no one can predict. And so that's, it's very humbling when
It
you
is.
think
It
of
yeah.
it that way.
It's
And
somewhat there's a slight sliver of peace in it though too, isn't there? Just like, well, I can keep trying to know, or I can, I think what is it? Was it Bezos? Build your business on what's not going to change in the next 10 years, not what might change. I
yeah,
love it, and I think Morgan Housel kind of supports that. I've read the abstract for Same as Ever. I haven't actually read the book, but he touches on that a little bit in the Psychology of Money as well. It's a good read for
absolutely.
anybody out there. And I gave it to my 20-year-old nephew and niece because I'm like, you need to read this book because someone should have given it to me when I was 20 as well. Gives you a fresh perspective on
Yeah.
1858. Obviously, this is an organization, Wajax, that plays the long game. Yet you're publicly traded, and as the CEO, you're on the quarterly earnings calls. You're accountable to the analysts. How do you balance out? And just what you said there, like, hey, we're looking at it, we're planning for it, but we don't know, and we have to say
Mhm.
that out loud because to say otherwise is a falsehood. How do you balance the I would assume is there a tug of war between an organization that clearly has played and is playing the long game, and you've got quarterly accountabilities that are held up in front of you on a quarterly basis, monthly basis from a numbers perspective. Is it a juggling act or is it a rhythm that just is the public markets?
I would say it's both a juggling act and a rhythm. So I spent the majority of my career in mid-market private companies, and there's a monthly, there's less of a quarterly rhythm in those. It's more of a monthly and an annual rhythm, at least in the companies that I've been a part of.
Yeah. How are we doing today? And then what did the year look like compared to last year?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, exactly. And you have a monthly report and you go through it, but
Yeah.
just a quarter is less important than a year or a
It's
month.
just a series of months. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think there's just more. Both public and private companies definitely think about the long term. I mean, that's one of the nice things about public market capital is that you're typically not thinking about like a potential sale or something like that.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah.
in private businesses, you might be working towards a sale, so you'll do something different. But in a publicly traded company, there's no logical next step up the ladder.
Right.
You're kind of
There
publicly
is kind of
traded.
a in perpetuity, right, mindset.
Exactly. So that allows you to think,
Hmm.
to think in the really long term. But then that balances out with like there's quarterly results that you have to deliver. And if you don't, then there's just so much pressure to stop doing all the long term stuff. So that's where the balance is. It is really a tricky balance, and not just because it's a publicly traded company, but I think because there's so many stakeholders. When I was in the private company world, there's just far fewer stakeholders. You've got your ownership group, which is usually pretty tight. If you happen to be owned by private equity, which we never were, you got a small board that you report to, um, and then it's kind of it, right? Like, of course, there's your employees and your suppliers and your customers, but the people that you have to report to per se, like it's a small group.
Mhm.
And when you are a publicly traded company, that group is larger. So usually a board is larger. Our board, including me, is 9 people. So that's the largest like business board that I've ever been involved with. They're all incredible directors and they add a lot of value, but that is a lot of different voices to wrangle together to come to a consensus.
No doubt.
Then there are investors, and there's a lot of them, um, and the relationship with investors is kind of tricky because sometimes they don't even tell you how much they own of you. So sometimes you don't even know. They're just, I think you're an investor, and they'll kind of tell you whether they're holding the position or not, but sometimes they won't tell you how much. So you're trying to gauge, all investors are important, but somebody that owns 10% of your company versus somebody that owns 0.1% of your company, that's it is a different level of importance.
Right, but
Um,
it might not change their willingness to be vocal.
exactly, right?
Yes.
And so balancing the importance of all those voices, and they're all really, really smart. So like taking their thoughts with genuine interest is important, but how much are you going to act on them? That's really up to you. And then there's a whole analyst community. So in our company, we have 4 analysts that cover us. So they have different motivations than investors, but they still have a very vested interest in what's going on with you. And then there's the banking relationships, and those are much more important in a publicly traded company. maybe not more important, but just deeper, because there's not only do you usually in a private company you'll owe the bank some money. In a publicly traded world, usually that's the case too, but it's bigger dollars because it's usually a bigger company, so the relationship has to be a little bit deeper and tighter. Plus, there's all this public market stuff that the banks are involved with. They might have an analyst on their team, and there's just more involvement. So you kind of go from the small group of shareholders to a more confusing group of investors and analysts and a board and banks. And really, so kind of managing all of their expectations and views is a challenge. They say that there's this quote that says that the CEO, that it's the intersection of contradiction. and it's so true, because there are so many stakeholders, and even beyond those groups in the publicly traded world, there's other groups. Like there's these proxy advisory firms. One's called Glass Lewis and one is called ISS, and they evaluate your company based on what you're doing, and they provide advice to shareholders. So you kind of have to manage to their expectations a little bit too. And so there's just all these different groups that have a little bit more of a say and some influence on what happens in your company. And you got to balance all of that with what is the best for everyone in the long term, while also trying your best to not drop the ball on short-term results.
Sounds like thinking small company, usually relatively aligned, similar. You've got so many stakeholders. So let's paint a real scenario. The last, I don't know, maybe 6 months, because I keep an eye on what's happening at Wajax. Things have been a little bit lower and to the right, not up, not a slight downward slide. How does that impact you in the day-to-day, your ability, your requirement, your accountabilities? Do you get paralyzed in just being accountable to that versus how do you move forward and still keep those two games in mind? Like it almost seems implausible that a single individual, the CEO, the guiding light of it all, is able to navigate all that. And I know that's the role and that's the opportunity. It feels like a really tricky balance.
It for sure is. One of the things that you really got to make sure is that you have a really, really solid team. And I think everyone says that in every business.
Yeah.
But in a publicly traded company, so much more of your time is spent on all these external parties that I just mentioned, that you do have less time in a day for the operations of the business. So you really got to make sure that you got to have great people in the operations side of the business. So that's kind of one main idea that's pretty important. Also, there is while there's a lot that's going on, and there is this quarterly rhythm, and there's just a lot more every month and every quarter to get through from a governance perspective and a reporting perspective, there is a bit of a rhythm and a machine to all of it. And when I first got to this company, I was kind of surprised at how little I had to do in terms of preparing all of that. Like it just kind of arrives on your desk. All the documents are done. You might have some comments about your own quotes and things like that, and what goes into the press release. But generally, there's a really, really strong team that does all of that, and you're not even so much approving as just reviewing and understanding, because the financials are the financials. I mean, you can't. I can't change them. They're just
private mid-market company. You might be up late the night before preparing for the board meeting, right? Yeah,
exactly. And so there is just a better kind of machine and cadence to all of this, and it's been going on for decades. I mean, our company has been around a long time. We've been around 167 years. We haven't been publicly traded that whole time, of course, but we have been publicly traded since 1966.
Okay,
so
I was going to ask when that was.
So there are decades of of this rhythm kind of flowing. But as you mentioned, our results over the last number of quarters haven't been great, and kind of the nice thing about being in a private company before is that there is no publicly viewable stock price in your face every day. Like you're the measure of what the financial world thinks of you it's shown right there every day, very clearly, easily accessible on the internet and on your phone, which is nice, but also not nice, because I think it does create some short-term noise. And as you know, the owner of a private company, what is your business worth? Who knows? Like one day if you sell it, you'll find out. Yeah. But until then, you don't really worry about it. All you worry about is just running a good business and doing the best you can for your shareholders and your employees and your customers and your suppliers and for the communities that you serve. And that's kind of what
and
you
every
do.
month, if you're on top of it, you get a scorecard that lets you know where you stand based on
Yeah.
where you thought you might stand or where you forecasted to stand. But the only people that see that are typically you and your immediate leadership team.
Yeah, exactly. So having that external stock price is it's kind of like instant feedback on
Yep.
what you're doing. And and our company, we're a decent sized company. We've got about 2 billion in revenue, and our market cap is about 500 million, which is a decent size. But in the public markets, it's not. In the public markets, we
Small.
are a small cap stock, and what that means is that just there's less interest in us than versus a Microsoft or somebody. Everyone knows Microsoft. Every portfolio manager has a file on them. They sit in most people's portfolios. We don't. We don't sit in most people's portfolios. And so, in order for us to get attention from investors, we have to go and find that attention. We have to go to conferences, and we have to, we have a small investor relations group that helps us build interest in the stock. It's a sales
Well,
process
that's
like
kind of
any other.
your version of brand story, like literally
Yeah,
in
it
that
really
context,
is,
right?
and there's a
Yeah.
whole sales
People
process
aren't going
to
to
it.
invest in a company they don't know exists, right? Simply, if you can't
Right.
go there with your mind, you're never going to put your
Yeah.
dollars there. Simply put.
And one of our other challenges, I would say, is that we are what's called a thinly traded stock. So the volume of our stock that gets traded every day is quite low, which means that if a shareholder either buys a whole bunch or sells a whole bunch in one day,
It
it
shows.
can materially move our stock price. Like if one shareholder makes a massive purchase or sells a bunch of stock, it can move our stock price 10%. Um, and so what that means is sometimes the stock will go down 10% or up 10%, and I'll get a phone call from maybe somebody on our board or an investor saying, "Hey, do you know what happened?" And I say, "Nothing happened." Right?
Yeah,
We have nothing happened in the business. Somebody decided that they either wanted to get into the stock or out of the stock, and it moved it. And so it's an interesting challenge because you kind of mentioned that you get this instant feedback about what you're doing, but sometimes it's not even instant feedback about what you're doing. It's just that some investor
something that
somewhere
happened.
changed their mind or decided. It could be something as simple as they just needed the money for something else, right? Like
It might
maybe
have
they were
nothing. It might have nothing to
maybe
do.
they
They
yeah
just
maybe they were
rebalance.
buying
They
a
just
cottage.
rebalance their world for some reason.
Exactly. So it's so that's kind of the interesting balance, or some interesting balances of a publicly
Well,
traded
the
company.
transition from where you were to where you. Curious, but back to your operations team, and you and we've had this conversation offline. Like, hey, what are some of the differences? You're like, hey, there's so many things I used to be involved in. Now I have the best possible person for that thing, so I actually don't get involved in the same way I did before. Is that also part of the balance of insulating them from this noise so they can quote unquote do their job?
Yeah, I mean, that's a balance too, because I don't want to insulate our team fully from our board or from investors, because I think that's an important part of what's happening in the business. It's important for them to understand that, and I think it's important for their development. At some point, I feel like I've got a lot of runway, and I could do this job for a long time, and I want to do this job for a long time, but at the same time, I need people to be ready to take over my role, and that's one of the main jobs of a leader of a company, is to make sure that if you got hit by a bus, that there are some people who could probably take over, and part of that is just understanding how this part of that world works.
Okay,
Um,
that's fair. I appreciate that. Keeping
but at
everybody
the same
in
time,
the
you don't want
yeah,
to you
yeah.
don't want to inundate them with it. So it's a balance.
Yeah. How many direct reports do you have in your role, and is it structured that way? That is it formal like that?
Yeah. It's like any other company. So I've got a two senior vice presidents that run our business. One for our sales and operations, and one for our category management. A chief financial officer, chief people officer, head of legal, and head of kind of executive administration. So those would be my direct reports.
And your predecessor was in the role for I think 10 years. If I do I remember that
Correct.
correctly?
Yep.
And you are now, it's when, 3 years already?
Yeah,
4?
time flies, but it's been 3 years since I've been here.
Very, very cool. And how much, I'm just curious, now getting into the kind of the thread of leadership, and I've always known you to be an inclusive, highly engaged, really care about your people. From when you and I first met, that's been the brand that has been your form of leadership. Coming into an existing team, just thinking about that transition of like, they're them, but you're new. How was that balance, and how have you, over time, I know you got involved in, mission, vision, values, and creating some opportunities for the organization of things that I know really mattered to you. How's that last 3 years been, that balance of like, you're the new guy. Hey, have you met the new guy kind of thing situation, to then getting into a rhythm where you've now had a chance to influence the culture and the way people interact to fit more what you see as, the best version of?
I think going into any team always is it's a learning experience for everyone. I mean,
it is.
I didn't really know any of them too well. They didn't know me too well. Plus, we had a couple of planned retirements in there, so it was some. I brought in someone from the outside. I promoted some people from the inside. So it's been kind of building the team to where I want it to be, and I think we're pretty close to where we want to be. And your executive team is always it's always a work in progress. People are developing. At some point, people have kind of reached as high as they want to go, and maybe they want they want your job, but if you're going to be there for a while and you can't provide them that, they have to go somewhere else. And that actually happened with one of the executives that was on our team. I remember in one of our first meetings, I said, do you want to be a CEO? And he said, absolutely. And so at that point, I kind of knew, I mean, I want to keep this guy as long as I can, but I realize I'm not going to be able to keep him forever, because he has bigger ambitions, and that there is not another CEO role in this company for a period of time. And so he delivered a lot of great value to this company, did a lot of great things, and then ultimately moved on to be the CEO of another company, which I was happy for him and really proud that our company had sprouted another leader of a company like that. But I would say that those teams are always in motion, always changing, and they also change with whatever the company needs at the time too. I mean, sometimes you just need really stable leadership just to keep the ship going in the direction it's going, and sometimes you need a little bit more transformation and change management, and that requires different people too.
The back to the word rhythm seems to be coming up in my mind as I'm chatting with you more. There is a rhythm, and you're right. What the rhythm of last year at this time and the rhythm of now is different, often because of external factors, but just the company's a living, breathing thing. How do you what are some of the anchor strategies or the ways you think about, culture from an inclusion, emotional intelligence, psychological safety, a lot of the buzzwords that get thrown around, but really what those all translate to me is a team that really feels comfortable to speak up, to question, to engage, to not, one of my favorite, the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion in the room, versus no, everyone has a chance to question and engage. And I know you to be an inclusive leader. How do you keep that going in a world where oftentimes speed, time, pressure can sometimes crush the opportunity to go, wait a second, I really want to understand this more. No, I don't have time. We got to move forward. How do you keep those two? How do you keep all that in check?
I think like everything, it's a balance. I tend to err on the side of more inclusion and getting more opinions. I do think I think that the benefit of, I think you make a better decision, but it's often not as fast a decision. And I believe that the better decision, a little bit slower, is the better outcome. But there's other people who don't believe that, and they believe that.
Well said. No, there's people that disagree.
And there's a lot of people that would think, the kind of the dilly-dallying, that it slows people down, and all of a sudden you got people that are slowed down, and I hear that feedback sometimes too. And I think there's different types of leaders, and I just fall more on the side of the spectrum that is get more opinions and try to make the best possible decision, especially when it's a big one. And I think in this company, it's been a work in progress. I think my predecessor, he was quite a bit older than me, and it was his third or fourth round as a CEO of a publicly traded company.
Oh, interesting.
And
okay.
So he had this is where we're going. This is how we're getting there. And I just need you guys to do what I'm asking of you. And he was great at that, and people knew what to expect. And And then I came on, and I'm quite a bit different. And I don't know. I don't think either approach is better. They're just totally different. And
Hmm.
so I've been asking my team to try to adapt a little bit more to my approach, which they view as slower compared to the predecessor, because it is, but it's also a lot more inclusive. And I think you get better information and better feedback. And so that's kind of how I've come to it. In terms of getting good feedback from people, it's, I think, like, just day in and day out, you have to be truly open to the feedback, and when you get it, actually listen to it and try to do something with it. Or if you're not going to do something with it, at least tell your people that you're going to do that. And I think we've made a lot of good progress. I do get a lot of great feedback from our teammates, from our executives. And I just think even our top executive team gets a lot of really good feedback from our teams, and they're not afraid of any kind of retaliation or repercussion, because every time they do say something, my first response is, thanks for the feedback. I know that might not have been easy to say, but I appreciate you saying it. And then I'll tell them, I'm like, okay, I agree with you here. I know we could have moved faster on this, but here's why we didn't. Or I'll just say, hey, I appreciate that. I just don't agree with that. This is the way I want to go, and I just need you to be on board with that. And I think our teams have appreciated that, and just kind of doing that consistently every day, I think, is helpful.
How much work have you done or had to do? Maybe not, maybe some, maybe not any, on yourself to be able to be okay when that feedback shows up that really does hit. And it's like, oh, like sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I see your point. Other times it's like, that's nuts. I can't believe you said that. We're not going to, that's my inner dialogue. I'm not saying that out loud. How's that been a journey for yourself? I think some of us, maybe when we were younger, maybe I'm just projecting my own experiences here. Getting that feedback that you didn't want to hear, or that pushback when you really needed buy-in, and being self-aware enough to navigate it with and I heard you say it, thank you for your feedback. And all there can be a mantra around it. How's that journey been for you to manage the balance between maybe wanting to react when the feedback was just so contrary to what you wanted it to be, versus being open and honest and inclusive, even if you end up going in a different direction?
Um, yeah, I think I've always been pretty open to feedback, and I think I'm okay at receiving it.
Okay.
Um, and when it comes to just business feedback on should we do this or this or this, that's not very hard feedback to
Yeah.
receive. Like, it's just on a decision, right? Hey, you're faced with it's our team often views their role for me as being able to provide the best possible advice. And they
Mm.
say, here's our advice. You're faced with a choice. There's three things that you can do. I think you should do A or B or C. And they'll give me that specific feedback. That feedback is not hard to receive.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I think the hard to receive feedback is when, it's things about not necessarily your character, but about how you're doing things, and that
Mm.
people may not agree with it.
When
That
it
can be
hits
some.
close to home, close to the bone,
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
will. Yeah.
And our board is they're all so experienced. They've on average got more than 20 years experience than me, and so they'll give me feedback sometimes that doesn't necessarily make sense to me. I won't necessarily believe it.
Mm.
And then pretty much every time it turns out to be right. And and so
Oh,
I'm really,
damn. There is when that happens, right?
yeah. And so I'm really, I starting to. So sometimes you take the feedback and you say, okay, I got it. I don't agree with it, but I appreciate the feedback, and I'm going to do what I was planning on doing initially.
Yeah.
And I think I realize over time that what got me here isn't going to get me there. I still need to keep learning new things, and I need to probably do things a little bit differently. And I've got this group of these directors who are, while directors aren't necessarily your mentors per se, they do provide a lot
Mm.
of guidance.
Yep.
And I just got to believe that what they're saying is right based on their decades of experience in this sphere that I'm fairly new to. And so that's been it's humbling when you hear something from them saying you need to do this, and it's kind of against what your gut is telling you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you think, is my gut that wrong? and
But my
sometimes it
gut
is.
maybe doesn't have the 20-year experience that they have in that situation. But that's all easy to say right now as we're being very rational
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, and it's definitely easy to say now, but when you're
Yeah.
hearing it, I find my acceptance period is 24 to 48 hours. Like
I like
I'll
that.
hear a bunch of stuff and I'll be like, I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm writing it all down, and then kind of digest it over the next day, and then the day after, I'll call our board chair or whoever, and I'll say, I think you're probably right here, or can I just talk through this a little bit more to understand the feedback a little bit better, because I've had some more thoughts since then, and then just have a deeper conversation with our directors about it. I find their counsel really invaluable, and usually right.
Well, I appreciate the taking it away, creating space and taking time. I was doing some writing recently about curiosity, my favorite topic, and I found a Harvard Business Review, so it must be credible article about the number one reason curiosity often gets sidelined in organizations because it's accused of wasting time. And I was like,
Yeah.
let me unpack. There's so many layers too,
Yeah.
and it was a US based study, and 70% of people believe, organizations believe that curiosity is a time waster versus a value addition. I'm like, I disagree, but let me think about that. So I really like what I've heard so far, not only because it fits my narrative, but I've learned this about myself. Step away, take a little bit of time, ponder this, maybe let the emotional response that sometimes can cloud settle down a little bit so I can rationalize and look at the information. And yeah, it often is, sleep on it is a real strategy.
Yeah, I sleep on every big decision always. Very
How do you
important.
now, when you think about your team, and you might be creating the same paradigm for them, how do you coach that? Or how, and another question, does your leadership team all have coaches? Is that something you believe in? I know you're very much about personal development and always going forward. Is that something that permeates through the culture of your organization?
It does a bit. Um, some have coaches, some don't. Like the ones that
Mhm.
want them do. I don't force it on anyone. But
I find
a
that's a
number,
faulty strategy as well.
yeah, a number of them do have coaches, and then some participate in larger groups. So like I participate in a McKay CEO forum group,
Oh, nice. You're
and
McKay. Right on. Nice.
as does one of our other executives. Others do one-on-one. Some do a combo. It's something that I'm happy to invest in. There's that saying, what if we spend all this money on training these people and they leave, and well, what if we don't and they
And they
stay? And
stay. I love that. I've recently said that to somebody. I think I
yeah,
butchered it. So thanks for correcting it.
and it's so true. So we try to put money into training. I think we need to do a better job, like kind of more into our business, training our more
Okay.
frontline managers. I think there needs to be more effort put there, training them how to do their jobs really properly and training them on best practices. So it's something that we're prioritizing and focusing on in the coming years. But yeah, I think just external development is good, an external perspective is good. And then when you talk about curiosity, I think talking through problems as an executive team is important. And in your report that you mentioned, some people think it's a waste of time. I get that too. I'll even get that in
Yeah.
our team. Like, is this worth really talking about? Like, is this worth really debating? Um, and I say the process of the debate is important. It helps us understand how we think, how each other thinks. It helps us understand each other's biases. It helps us understand where each other is coming from. And so that's why it's important. And then I try to allocate some time to just development for our executive team when we're together. So once a month, we'll do a few hours of some type of development exercise together. Sometimes,
Well, which also creates rapport.
yeah,
So when that conversation does get
yeah,
intense, there's a little more trust in the room, right?
yeah,
That's where I find
absolutely,
the best conversations come from. If you're feeling
absolutely.
guarded, back to the psychological safety of, oh, geez, I really want to, like, you want to hear what I really feel. Yes, I do. That's a tough one sometimes in a lot of corporate cultures. That's been abused out of some team members.
Yeah, and I do find that I try to, as best as I can, to ask people for their view on something. So we've got a group of 7 people that will meet, and um, as some people have given their view, and I see a few haven't. I said, well, what do you think? And get them to give their opinion, because I know we've got a few people on our team who are just like every team. They tend to be quiet unless they're really really sure of "Oh, I've thoroughly researched this and here's my research response." And sometimes I just say, I just want your opinion on this. I know you haven't researched it, but based on your knowledge of your area of expertise, and give us your opinion here. And I think that gives them the freedom to say something, because if you say, what do you think, and they say, well, I don't know enough, you kind of have to frame it for them,
Yeah.
saying, I know you haven't researched it. I just want your opinion solely based on what you've heard here today.
Someone called it the other day, not interact. Some people like to externalize, some people like to internalize. I'm an externalizer. I think we all know that. And some people my wife likes to internalize. But, I think you made the comment about even 24 to 48. Sometimes we'll have something, maybe a misalignment. I call it no fighting, just misalignments. It'll be hours later. She'll be like, you know what? I was thinking about what happened. Here's what I think. Where I want to talk about it right away, she wants to internalize it for a while. And once I started realizing that, our executive team started to function much better.
Yeah. Well, I found too that many people, and I do this sometimes too, is you really take some time to synthesize everything, and then, okay, I've got it in a very, very clear and concise message of what I want to say, and then you say it, and it's a short message, right? And you believe, and sometimes I do, that I'm like, okay, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've come to a very clear, very thoughtful, very concise conclusion, and boom, there it is. And for everyone else, you just said a two-liner. Like they don't appreciate how much effort you put into that. They weren't on the journey with
you. They weren't on the journey to get there with you,
right? And so your two-liner has as much impact as somebody else's two-liner who didn't even think about it at all. And so I think just getting the really thoughtful, quiet people to just speak up a little bit more, say their point a few times, elaborate on their point. How did they get there? Is helpful, because me included, I kind of feel like, okay, well, I kind of gave you the answer, but the journey happened in my head, not in front of everyone.
I really like that comparison for us who like to externalize. That two-liner that you blurred out has the same weight for everyone else as the one that was internalized for 24 hours and got thought out. And maybe you worked on a whiteboard in the other room, and then you came back with this thing that was perfectly crafted. I find that with creative, when we're presenting creative, when you go away to a day at McKay or a day at Tech that I'm involved in, and you come back with a big idea after you listen to a 4-hour speaker, and your team is like, okay, like, what is this, just the flavor of the month here? Like, what are we doing with this idea? I learned that very early on in my career. Exactly. Like, I got to percolate that all day long, and I show up and go, this is the best idea ever. And they're like, it seems like an idea. I don't know if it's the best idea ever. Allowing everybody in on the journey and collaborating it deliberately around a team. But I like what you said, creating safety, but also tweaking and pulling and prying, and as a leader, influencing that of getting people to participate. There is an art form to it. And I do think back to rhythm and cadence, which seems to be an underpinning of our conversation. There's a rhythm of like, hey, this worked last time, maybe it'll work again. And, the world isn't getting less busy. So creating that space and taking time, even contrary to the Harvard Business Review article, I do believe is valuable. I do support it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm curious, because you're the guy with the crystal ball right now, because you're on the other end of the microphone. When we think about Canada go forward next couple of years, obviously your playground is the Canadian sea to shining sea. What are you thinking about the economy? How are we looking? Any forecasts or any crystal ball stuff you want to play? We're at the end, so if anybody's still listening, we're just playing around at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of mentioned before. We're awful at forecasting anything, and. If you would have rewinded a year, I don't think anyone saw Trump coming out, and then let alone tariffs and this potential existential threat to the Canadian economy. I don't think anyone saw any of that. Yeah. So, at least I didn't. So, I certainly did not.
Yeah. Case study of one. I got you. Yes.
Maybe some way smarter people did, but I certainly did not see that coming. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what Trump's end game is here. Maybe it's to negotiate the CUSMA earlier. Maybe it's something else. Will there actually be tariffs? Will there not be? I don't know. Will they last a month? Will they last 10 years? I don't know. But what I hope happens is the threat, like this. We're starting to realize that we've relied on the United States to be our big brother for a long time, and we're realizing that maybe they're not as reliable for us as we thought. And I hope that helps this country get its act together in terms of getting more competitive. I hope that like this moment in time sparks us to do some things that just maybe would have taken years before. Maybe we can get done.
Don't waste a good crisis
of months. Yeah, exactly. It's a potential crisis.
Yeah.
And let's not waste it. And I think when I think about the interprovincial trade barriers, like you talk to business owners who make something and then sell it somewhere else, like they'll tell you it's easier to sell stuff in the US than it is between provinces.
Yeah.
Why?
That's fixable. We should be able to fix that. I couldn't agree with you more.
Like that, that is us getting in our own way. Like if we can just get out of our own way to do that, that would be great. Regulation and just like crazy amounts of regulation. We have so much more than so many other places. If we can just, obviously do things responsibly, but not over-regulate ourselves to the point where no one wants to build anything meaningful, that, we can do that. We can get out of our own way and do that. And hopefully that creates more energy projects. I think, there's so much debate on energy and climate change. But the fact is that Canada, I think it'll be hard to argue against this statement. Canada's successful because we're a resource nation. We have the wealth that we do and the lifestyle that we do because of the vast natural resources that we have. I think it's hard to argue against that. And again, I think we've perhaps, the same way we've taken our United States neighbors for granted, I think perhaps we've taken our extremely valuable natural resources for granted. And if we can, again, get out of our own way, get some more of that approved, regardless of what it is, let's getting more things built and giving us options to sell whatever our goods are to places other than the United States. We can do that. That is all on us. And if we can do something about interprovincial trade barriers, and create other markets for some of the goods and some of the natural resources that we have other than the United States, it's all on us. It's a great opportunity. And I just hope that we have the kind of the political will to make it happen, because that's kind of where it lays.
Well said. I think if not now, then when? And I saw some stats the other day, and I can't remember the numbers, but just like smoothing out and removing barriers of interprovincial trade versus the GDP impact of the tariffs in the U.S. And it was almost equalized. They said if we cleared this up, the financial impact we can have, and then getting to broader global markets, it was almost. It was better in the long run, and the long run wasn't that far away either. That was 6 or 8 months of like quote unquote getting our shit together. So I hope that we have it's easy to blame outward. It's much better to look inward, because I think that's where only change happens, because we're not going to change what he doesn't do or what he doesn't say in the media, but we certainly have the ability to smarten up. I will boldly jump on the train of everything you just said.
Yeah. I think it's a defining moment for our country. We've, over the last decade or two, we've kind of lagged a little bit in a few of those areas, and they're all fixable. And I don't want to say, hey, you politicians, you do it, but many of these things are in the political. They are in the political realm.
I think if they clear the path, which I think is their job and their main focus is to allow for industry to move forward. That's my view. There's a lot of innovation and get her done attitude out there across the country that I think would step in to fill that gap pretty quickly if those barricades were removed. 100%.
So I believe in Canada. I love this country, and I think our people can do it. And now's the time.
Yes. It's a mic drop moment. Thank you for joining me on the Five Timers Club. Every conversation has been enjoyable. It's been fun. It's been great to get to know and go you over the years. I'm not saying there isn't a number 6, but let's just celebrate 5 and let's just sit with it for a minute. But I really appreciate. Congratulations on the role and all the great work you do in our community, and just thanks for being willing to come on and have a very honest conversation. Thanks, my friend. I appreciate it.
Great to see you, Tyler. Thanks for having me on the show.